You're absolutely correct. And one thing I have to give you credit for is that you use the word dilemma correctly. A dilemma is where you have to choose between two equally bad outcomes. And the one difference is that if President Putin continues the war, there may be some sort of saving grace. Something might happen that will prevent eventually Russia is going to collapse. It could collapse soon or it could collapse later.
So you believe that Russia
right now,
definitely will collapse sometime in the future?
Yes. Yeah, I have almost no doubt that Russia will collapse at some point. If they stop the war, they'll collapse almost immediately. If they continue the war, I think there's actually less of a chance of collapse because something might come up to the point where they're able to either make a breakthrough or something goes in their favor. It could be something as simple as Western Europe decides they've had enough of this. They want cheap Russian gas again. We're not going to support Ukraine anymore or send them shells. There is a non-zero chance that could happen. There is a non-zero chance that Russia could do an information war push to convince people that we're going to use nuclear weapons on the West if this doesn't stop. That might actually work. And then all of a sudden they are able to take ground because people stop supplying Ukraine with weapons. So if you want to get technical, it is better to, at least for Russia, it is better to continue the war in the hopes that other avenues might pay off for completing the annexation of Ukraine, although that could take years.
Also, from your perspective, it seems like Vladimir Putin also faces a dilemma about his physical life, physical threat, because if he continues the war against Ukraine, he could also face some critical issues, critical threats to his life, because he continues the war against Ukraine. And recently, Ukraine has eliminated Russian general Igor Kirillov inside the Kremlin, inside Moscow, in Moscow. On the other hand, if he stops the war against Ukraine, he also could be eliminated, deposed from his
You're absolutely correct.
from Kremlin. Does it mean that in any kind of case, Vladimir Putin has a good chance to be physically eliminated in any kind of scenario in the future?
I think that chance grows every day because look, you have generals who every general might think they can do a better job. And all you need is that one general who goes, you know what, I should be in charge. And I have the will of my troops behind me. My troops are loyal to me, not the Kremlin. Maybe I can do this. Now, I don't know whether that means the war would actually stop. The war might certainly continue because maybe some general thinks, hey, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna prosecute this war the right way. Look, President Putin's what, 70 some years old? 72, is it? I think so, 72. I mean, look, when you're 72, you got more years in back of you than you do in front of you, right? So he's going to be taken out, one way or the other, either by God or by man. That day is coming. And, what he doesn't want is to be taken out before that legacy of his is cemented.
Does it mean that Vladimir Putin has signed a death warrant for him, for himself, after the day after he launched this illegal invasion of Ukraine?
I think that's an accurate assessment. He might have thought that, look, this is going to be a 3-day operation, in and out. It's just going to be like Crimea. But that might have started the long road to hell, once he decided to commence the operation.
Also, I'd like to cover with you another interesting topic about recent Trump's statement on Panama Canal and Greenland. Trump said that it would serve U.S. national interest to regain control over Panama Canal and gain control over Greenland. And my first question will be about the Panama Canal deal. Do you feel that this Panama Canal deal is really a bad one. That's why Trump wants to reconsider the main points of this treaty with the government of Panama.
Well, of course it was a bad deal, right? Like it's something that the United States built. It's something that benefits Panama, and there is a strategic importance to the Panama Canal, an extreme strategic importance to it. Now, it would make sense for the United States to gain control over that, preferably by economic means or by negotiation. I think President Carter, who gave the Panama Canal essentially back to Panama, I think that he had good intentions, but at the time we weren't concerned about China as a world power. And essentially, if the United States controls the Panama Canal, it makes it a lot harder for Chinese ships to move into the Atlantic. It makes it extremely difficult for them to do so. So the Panama Canal is of extreme strategic importance.
And what are the chances of another military operation, invasion of Panama Canal by the US military?
That would be difficult to do, not from a technical standpoint, but in order to do something like that, Congress would have to get on board. And it's very difficult to get congressmen to agree on anything, much less invading another country. It was difficult for them to get on board with invading Iraq. In some cases, it was difficult to get them. Well, Afghanistan was a little bit easier. Iraq was a little bit harder. And the only way we would be able to do something like that is with permission from Congress, because Congress holds the funding. The president can't really send troops anywhere for longer than a certain amount of time before Congress has to allocate money for those troops to stay where they are. Now, Panama doesn't have a military, so from a technical standpoint, it would be a very easy fight to actually get troops down to Panama, invade Panama, and take over the Panama Canal. It wouldn't be that difficult to do. But getting the funding to do that, whether it is the morally correct decision, that's a different story. And in all honesty, why fight when you can buy? And if there's enough people who are interested in selling and the United States has money, I don't see why the United States can't buy the Panama Canal back from Panama or come to some sort of licensing or leasing agreement for a certain amount of years. Oftentimes when you hold out a dollar bill, that's a lot more attractive than holding out a rifle.
And why does Donald Trump want Greenland from your perspective? Because there are US troops in Greenland, they are deployed, and there is one military base in Greenland. So why does Trump want Greenland if US military is already there?
So Greenland is probably one of the most important places in the world, or will be one of the most important places in the next century. Whether you believe in climate change or not, the ocean, the ice caps in the North Pole, they're receding. And what's going to happen is there's now going to be a northern passage to Europe. So Chinese ships that want to go to Europe, they would be able to go past the Bering Strait. They would be able to go through what was ice in the Bering Sea and the Arctic, and travel to Europe the long way, not the long way, but without going through the Panama Canal. So there's that. There is the fact that anybody who controls Greenland essentially will control the water route that will be popping up in the next couple of years in the Arctic. The second thing is that Greenland is in the perfect place to put a missile defense system. So if you can put a missile defense system in Greenland, you are essentially protecting everybody from Russian nuclear strikes. We already have a radar system in Greenland, but by putting missiles there, it's a great way of creating a shield, an umbrella to shoot down missiles in the boost phase before they get to America. So Greenland is of extreme strategic importance. And I think that's why you kind of hear all this stuff about Greenland. Yes, we do have a military base, but I believe the president thinks that it's very important to maintain control over the entire country, or at least some sort of hegemony over the entire country, mainly because it is of the utmost strategic importance for America.
Does this mean that Trump's plans, Trump's willingness to take control over Greenland and also Panama Canal, don't you think that these plans are really bad news for Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, especially taking control over Greenland?
Taking control over Greenland would not be good. Russia wants the Arctic to be their lake. China is trying to get a foothold in the Arctic as well, because they see its importance for delivering goods. Getting a permanent American presence, or even buying Greenland and turning it into an American territory, that would be kind of a game changer for Russia, because there's this massive land barrier there that they would have to fly over. Their missiles would have to fly over before they hit the United States. So it really prevents their deterrence, their missile deterrence. And actually, now that I think of it, it doesn't just prevent ICBMs, land-based missiles. It also prevents submarines from getting close to the United States. And that's because a lot of Russian submarines are in what are called bastions in the Kara Sea. And these bastions, essentially very few Russian submarines ever leave the Kara Sea. Instead, their nuclear missile submarines just kind of sit in the Kara Sea for, I think, 30 days at a time as their second strike capability. But if you're in the Kara Sea, what do you have to, and you shoot your missiles toward America, what do you have to fly over to get to the U.S.? You got to fly over Greenland, right? So that would actually negate their missile submarines as well. So you get 2 for 1 purchasing Greenland.
And my last and quick question for you, and if you can deliver a quick answer, it would be great. Would you personally support Donald Trump and the United States gaining control over Greenland and also, for example, Panama Canal?
It's a very good question. From a strategic standpoint, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to purchase these things. Invasion, that's going a little too far. You're essentially going to invade another member of NATO. That doesn't make any sense. And people talk about invasion, but people talk about things they don't understand all the time. Purchasing probably wouldn't be a bad idea. There is precedent for this. We purchased Alaska from Russia. I want to say it was in 1826, I believe. I might be getting that wrong. But there is a history of the United States purchasing land. And if the people of Greenland agree to it, why not?
Thank you, Ryan, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to come on your show.
But you're confident that the decision on ceasefire in Ukraine will completely depend on Vladimir Putin?
Well, no, it takes 2 sides to agree to a ceasefire. But when I look at long range at Ukraine's position, there are clearly 2 elements that are critical for Ukraine if Ukraine is going to be able to accept a ceasefire. One is that Ukraine should retain its full sovereignty, its full freedom of decision-making, freedom of action. And the other, and the most difficult one, is that Ukraine clearly is not going to want to accept a ceasefire unless Ukraine has credible guarantees of its security, a real sense of certainty that it has the means to deter Russia from attacking again. And the sort of measures that would be required to give Ukraine that level of security are measures which Putin, I think, will find very hard to accept. So I think that's the critical point in the negotiation. There are a lot of other things that will be involved, a lot of elements that will be on the table. But the crunch point is Ukraine can't have a ceasefire unless the ceasefire gives Ukraine security and the means to prevent a further attack by Russia. And that would require Putin accepting measures that he, at the moment, I think, is very reluctant to accept.
President Zelensky says that Vladimir Putin is afraid of Donald Trump because Donald Trump has the power to stop the war against Ukraine. Do you also believe in that Putin is afraid of Trump?
I don't know whether he's afraid of Trump, but Trump is a bit of an unknown quantity in a way that gives Trump some leverage. I think Putin is probably a little nervous about what Trump might do. None of us know what Trump is going to do, and I suspect that Trump himself probably doesn't know at this point what he's going to do, although he becomes president now in 7 days' time. But he has a range of options. One of his options, which I hope he will look at very seriously, is to increase pressure on Russia. If Trump is going to go into a negotiation with Putin, and Trump has now talked about the idea of having a meeting with Putin, he needs to have leverage. How does he get that leverage? It seems to me there are two obvious ways that Trump gives himself some leverage in a negotiation. One would be to increase American military support for Ukraine. And the other, and I think really important one, would be to increase the pressure on the Russian economy. The Russian economy is the Achilles heel of Vladimir Putin. It is his weak point. It is in trouble. And there is more that could be done to tighten the sanctions on Russia, particularly the sanctions on the export of oil, but also more secondary sanctions to prevent third countries providing all kinds of services for Russia, supplying equipment to Russia that cannot be supplied directly, providing financial services, trading with Russia in different ways. And I think that the Americans have the power, in combination with the Europeans, to put more economic pressure on Russia. And so if I was advising Trump, I would advise him not to rush into a meeting with Putin, but to make sure that before he had any meeting with Putin, he actually had not only a carrot, but a big stick. And if Trump does that, he might have a chance of persuading Putin to give some ground. But without that, if he just goes into a meeting without that level of preparation, I think the meeting will be a failure.
So do you believe that Donald Trump has enough power to force Vladimir Putin to agree with a ceasefire proposal?
No, I don't think Trump is in a position to force Putin or indeed to force Zelensky. Trump cannot just impose a settlement. Putin would, rather than accept humiliating terms from the Americans, Putin would continue the war. And he has the ability to continue it, although he will find it harder and harder to sustain the current level of hostilities. But he would be very determined not to be humiliated by Donald Trump. He has to be able to claim that he has achieved something in return for this huge loss of Russian life and Russian resources that the war has entailed. So Putin has the ability to say no. Trump does not have the ability to force Putin to accept whatever Trump wants.
Even if he sends Ukraine military aid, allows to strike inside Russia and imposes even tougher sanctions on the Russian economy?
That would increase the pressure on Putin, and I think Trump should do that because that will give Trump leverage. But it doesn't mean that Putin would, as it were, at that point surrender to Trump. Putin will not surrender to Trump but it would mean that Trump had a stronger hand to play in a negotiation with Putin. So you can't force Putin, but you need to persuade Putin, and persuade him not by offering him rewards, but by putting more pressure on Putin. That's what Trump needs to do.
But do you believe that it would be possible for Donald Trump to persuade Vladimir Putin about any kind of topic, about a ceasefire? Is it really possible to persuade Vladimir Putin about in any kind of topic?
It's possible. It's not easy. I think it's possible if Putin gets seriously worried that he is not going to make rapid progress in the war, and the progress that the Russians have recently made has been slow, it has not been rapid, and it has been at huge cost in terms of Russian casualties, losing up to 2,000 troops in a single day in order to gain small amounts of territory. And his economy is under extreme pressure. It's not going to collapse, but it's getting worse. And these are factors which will be in Putin's mind. They do give him a reason to look for a way out. It doesn't mean that it forces him to give up, but it does give him an incentive to give up. That's why Trump potentially could have leverage.
How do you see the possible scenario of Putin's endgame, the end of his regime?
There are only three ways his regime could end. One would be if the people close to him mounted a coup against him. That seems to me very unlikely, because he has always been very frightened about his personal security, and he has appointed to all the key positions around himself people who are super loyal to him, but also people who are incriminated in his own corruption and criminality. People who therefore would be vulnerable themselves if Putin fell from power. The second way in which a dictator can be removed from power is if you have a mass revolt of the populace against the dictator. Putin is using such harsh security measures in Russia, murdering and locking up opponents, taking away freedom of expression. It seems very, very unlikely that the Russian people would succeed in rising up against him, and they don't appear to be in a mood to do so. I think they would be frightened of the chaos that would result from that. So, and there is no organized opposition that is even possible in Russia at the moment. So this actually means, sadly means, that the end of the Putin regime has to await the end of Vladimir Putin, who appears to be in good health, is in his early 70s, could live for several more years while his country gets further and further downhill, goes backwards, and weakens, but does not collapse. And I'm afraid that our default assumption must be that Putin will remain in power until the Grim Reaper comes to collect him.
And how do you see the possibility for deputinization after Putin's departure?
The possibility for what?
Of deputinization process.
Deputinization. It will happen. It will happen because Putin has done such damage to his own country. It may not happen immediately. It may not be Putin's immediate successor. I think the most likely successor to Putin will be clearly somebody a bit younger, but somebody who has been groomed by Putin. Critically in Russia, you need to have the support of the security organs, which are immensely powerful. And Putin's successor, therefore, is likely to be somebody from a Putinist orbit. But as you go further down the road, people in Russia are going to realize that Putin has taken the country seriously backwards. You remember that back in 2009, Dmitry Medvedev, who at the time was pretending to be the president of Russia, wrote an article called Go Russia, in which he put the question, should a primitive economy based on raw materials and endemic corruption accompany us into the future? Well, that was 16 years ago. And that's precisely the same question that faces Russia now. And I think that in the post-Putin era, the people of Russia will want once again to modernize their country, to improve their country, not to be seen as a pariah state by the rest of the world, to try to restore a reasonable working relationship with the rest of Europe, to try to be respected in the way that they are not at the moment. In short, they will look back on the Putin era as a disastrous period for Russia that has taken them into this terrible war with Ukraine and that has left them with an economy which still depends heavily on the export of hydrocarbons and other raw materials and on its defense industry, a country which has been remilitarized by Putin, a country in which the standard of living has not improved over the last 10, 12 years, actually has gone backwards. And that's not what the people of Russia will want. So, and they particularly dislike the level of corruption. They're used to corruption in their society. The Soviet Union was deeply corrupt. But the level of corruption under Putin is stratospheric. And I ask myself, has any leader in history stolen more from his people than Putin? And in 20 years' time, that's how the Russians will look back on Putin. At some point between now and then, I think they will make another effort to rejoin the civilized world.
Thank you, Ambassador Lyne, for your time and for your support for Ukraine and to glory to Ukraine.
Well, you're most welcome. And I do wish all the people of Ukraine well. They're going through a terrible period. And I think we in this country and across Europe feel deeply for them and desperately want to see them succeed in this struggle. So thank you very much.